All right. Now I will turn it over to Claire, who will start our facilitating our training for today. Take it away, Claire.
Thank you, Shay. So if you didn't join us last week, we went over some of the differences between GA4 and Universal Analytics. We also went over using Google Tag Manager. Today we'll be going more in depth into events and reports. And so we'll do a quick recap from session 1, just in case you weren't here. So GA4 does measure a few things differently. It has this new active users metric. Before in Universal Analytics, it was just total users. It also calculates bounce rate differently. The rule is a little bit looser. It has this new timer setting, but you can change the timer on that for the rule to be a bit stricter if you want. It also lets you include up to 25 custom parameters in events, which is really great. We also went over Google Tag Manager. That's a recommended way of setting up for GA4. And there are 3 main elements in Google Tag Manager. There's the trigger, which is the user action. There's the tag, which is sort of the output in GA4. And then there are the variables, which are all the details inside. And so we'll be going over 4 event types in GA4, and we'll explain why it's in this pyramid shape soon. And so at the bottom of the pyramid, there are automatically collected events. These are defaults. They're collected no matter what. They're already turned on. They're always being collected. Enhanced measurement events, they're default and turned on, but you can opt out if you want. We definitely recommend leaving the enhanced measurement events turned on, but for some reason, if you want to opt out of for any particular reason, you can do so. It'll just look like this. You just press the button to toggle it on or off. So here are some examples. There's a site search one. Maybe your website doesn't even have a search bar, so it's not really applicable to you. You can go ahead and turn that off, but it's pretty quick and easy. Then there are recommended events. These aren't out of the box ready like the other 2, but they're a really good starting point to work from. And so, for example, there's a recommended event called sign up. As you can imagine, you can go ahead and use that maybe whenever someone signs up for a newsletter on your website, but there are still steps you need to take in order to set that up, depending on how many newsletters you have, where exactly all those subscribe buttons are. But it's a really good starting point to work from. And then custom is just what it sounds like. It's completely from scratch. And so whenever you want to track an event, we definitely recommend starting at the bottom of the pyramid, seeing if Google Analytics already tracks that, if it's already available. If not, just move up to the next level of the pyramid. It'll just save you a lot of time and a lot of headaches because Google is great about already having lots of things already set up and templates ready to go. Now we're going to jump into a video demo going over events and reports. But really quickly, I just wanted to go over 2 things from last week, just in case you weren't here, because the trainings sort of are all blended together. And so I just want to make sure everyone knows where we're picking up off from. And so last week, we went over the structure of Google Tag Manager. And we talked about how within tags, there are variables housed under something called parameters. And then these parameters then determine their custom definition in GA4. And so in the video we're about to show, Brad will demonstrate how to create this custom definition and then link it back to its corresponding parameter in Tag Manager. And last week, we were halfway through going over the trends box clicks event. So essentially on the metrics for news site, there's this trends box, and we wanted to measure how many times people click on these circular radio buttons within the trends box. And so we set that up in Google Tag Manager. You see the tag type is GA4 event. In the video we're about to show, Brad will show us where exactly to find this in GA4.
Let's start off by going over here under reports, okay? And within the reports, let's go under engagement and click on events. And now we can see the different events that we've recorded in the last 28 days on Google Analytics 4. And as a reminder, some of these are built in by default. Others, for example, 2, 4, 5, 10, 11, those are custom. Okay, so let's stick with the one that we were just going over, trends box clicks. But let's go back to the metrics for news dashboard and let's do what we were just doing in preview mode. I'm going to click on stories and I'm going to click on psychology. So again, I have clicked on the trends box, and now if we go back to Google Tag Manager and look in real time, there I am in Nashville, Tennessee. 2 of us in the last 30 minutes because I was doing some tests, and now this is my latest activity, and we should see trends box clicks. And of course there were 3 because not counting preview mode in Google Tag Manager, which should not record data here, I have clicked 3 times in the last 30 minutes because I was doing some testing before recording. So this is me. That's how we know it's working. There's one other place that you can see this come out, and that is the Explore section, which is actually my preferred place to create reports in Google Analytics 4, which is another story. It's a little easier to customize, even though it does have its flaws, but we're going to look at Liz's custom report here. Okay, here we are. Her custom report has a tab for trends box clicks, and here we can see in the last 28 days the number of times that the trends box was clicked on each of these pages, right? So we can minimize these and see a little better. So this isn't a very complicated report, obviously, but it coincides with what we've been looking at, and this gives the Metrics for News team a better idea of what are the most popular pages where users are clicking on the trends box. And we could even add another column here that was by partner name so that they could get a better idea of which you all are more active in the trends box. Let's go back to the reports dashboard one more time, go back to the events page, and let's look at one more, which is page view. Again, this is a default event, but remember how we created some custom parameters. As we scroll down, we can see partner name, for example. Now, in this case, we've already created the custom definition, something we mentioned in the PowerPoint, and you might be wondering how to do that. So in the past, you would have gone to configure, but in the last few weeks, they've changed this. If we click on configure, it's going to tell us it's moved to admin. So let's go to admin, custom definitions, and now you can see all the different custom dimensions that we've created. So a custom definition could be a dimension or a metric. We don't have any custom metrics right now, but we do have custom definitions. And what you would do is click create custom dimensions, and just to keep it simple, for any parameter you've created in Google Tag Manager, this would be event. Dimension name, it can be any of these things. This is how it's going to show up on the report. So you don't have to use the underscore methodology that we talked about before. But in this case, we could call it, I'm even going to capitalize it, test. It's not a parameter anymore. It's going to be a dimension. The dimension pulls in the parameter. And then this is a test for a demo training. And here, you click the drop down, and you should see the different parameters you can choose from. And again, anything that you've created in Google Tag Manager, if you don't do this, the data is not going to show up. So let's pretend GA session ID, which we did not create, but let's pretend we wanted to create a dimension out of that. We would select it, we have a description, the dimension name, and we would hit save. We're not going to do that because we do have a limit. You're probably not going to run into the limit for most of your dashboards, but it's just something to be aware of. And once you set up your custom definitions or your custom metrics, in other cases, if it's numbers based, you would then wait 24 to 48 hours, and you should see them begin to show up in your reports.
Just to quickly summarize what Brad went over in his great video. And so you can find events in GA4 by going to the reports tab and then clicking under engagement. And from there, you can click into specific events, maybe the page view event or the trends box click event. And you can see all the details there, like event count, parameters like partner title, any other custom parameters you created. Brad showed us the partner name section, which is a custom parameter. If you want to make more customized reports, then the Explore tab is Brad's preferred place to do so. And then setting up custom definitions. If you want to do that, you go into the Admin tab. For any parameter you've created in Tag Manager, the scope will always just be event. And then there's a drop-down list, and you can choose the corresponding event parameter that's just pulled from Tag Manager. And now Brad's going to just review everything together, looking at the trends box clicks example.
Let's tie everything we've learned together by going over an example that we've already looked at, which is the trends box clicks event in the metrics for news dashboard. So remember, this is what it shows up like in GA4. And if we want to find out how this happens, let's backtrack a little bit. In Google Tag Manager, we have a tag. This whole thing here is a tag. And within the tag, the event name is trends box clicks. That dictates what shows up here. Within this tag, here's the trigger, which we're going to look at in just a moment. And there's also a variable within this tag. Again, you can have up to 25 custom parameters per tag. And in this case, we only use one. And the variable is publisher ID. So we have all three elements that we talked about in Google Tag Manager. We have the tag, we have the trigger, and we have the variable. Here's a more in-depth look at the trigger. This whole thing is the trigger, and that includes references to the trigger. Now, the trigger in this case is when someone clicks something, but only when that click has a click class of fancy radio, which we tested with preview mode previously. We know if someone clicks on metrics for news and the click class equals fancy radio, that can only be when it's a trends box click. So within the tag, which is all this, we have this trigger, which we're now seeing in more detail. And within this trigger, we use a variable click class to fire the trigger. And when it fires, the tag has a variable of publisher ID. So two variables, they're both different, but they're both associated with the overall tag. Here's how that parameter or variable of publisher ID shows up in the GA4 dashboard. The reason it shows up here is because in the admin section, we created a custom dimension within custom definitions. And here it is, trends box clicks. So this wouldn't show up if we hadn't created a custom dimension from that variable in the tag. And just to review where we looked in the code, we use the metadata from property name, and whatever it equals is what's going to show up in that dynamic variable, because we created a custom variable that you're seeing now. This is the variable for publisher ID that was in the tag we looked at, and it grabs the meta property name, which we can see here in this case is Science News. So again, here's what that looks like in Google Tag Manager. We have the publisher ID. So this dynamic variable, which we can see is the double brackets on both sides, that indicates it's dynamic, changes based on what is seen here, in this case, Science News. And that is how we get trends box clicks in Google Analytics 4. And when you click on trends box clicks, that is how you get a dynamic variable, which turns into a custom dimension, in this case, which is partner name. Thanks for joining today's training on Google Tag Manager. I hope you've learned a lot. As always, I like to say the best way to get started is just to dive in and experiment. As long as you're in preview mode, that's going to be your best friend, and you don't hit that submit button, you're not going to break your site. So go ahead and play around. I'm going to leave my email on the screen should you have any questions you want to reach out. Otherwise, best of luck, and I look forward to seeing you in Metrics for News, Google Analytics 4, and Google Tag Manager.
And now I'll hand it back over to Shay to talk with some newsrooms about their experiences with GA4.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, and just as a reminder, so Brad will be available for some Q&A in office hours in April, and I'll be sending a link out for registrations and reminders for each one as they come up throughout the month of April. He's the person we've relied on a lot. Some of you on this call may have utilized his experience in analytics to help set up your current GA4, your past analytics. And he's been a real help to a lot of our partners who use metrics for news and connecting their analytics to us. So he's a great resource, and you should feel free to reach out to him. We appreciate that. As I said in the email this week, and I'll reiterate again, the videos that we shared of his last week and this week are part of a longer, like half-hour plus video that he put together on just setting up things in Google Tag Manager and using that to manage your GA4. So it's in the resource link guide that's in the chat that I put in, and we'll keep sharing it out. Don't worry if you lose the link. But we have a link to that full Google Tag Manager video in there, so you're free to watch that in its entirety. And you can pause, stop, kind of go. But Claire did a great job of breaking out some of that video and creating these 2 slide decks out of it. So both are going to be available to you. So without further ado, since Science News was mentioned a few times, and Mike's been very gracious in answering some questions around reports in the chat for us, I'm going to have Mike Dennison from Science News talk a little bit about sort of what he's seeing so far in terms of just what GA4 looks like in terms of like reports, what he's able to track now versus analytics, and what the learning curve has been like. And so, Mike, I'm just going to turn over to you and let you talk a little bit about your experience with Science News and Science News Explorers, et cetera.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Shay. Feel free to drop questions in the chat as I talk about this. Obviously, there's a lot of different things to pick apart in GA4. So we initially at Science News, we've had GA4 running on our site in some form or another since some point in the middle of 2021. Because at that point it was kind of advertised as like, just get this on your site as soon as possible, because it's none of the data is going to transition over from UA to GA4, so you might as well get on it right now and figure out the configuration later. Brad was very helpful in actually getting the implementation working the way we wanted it to. So we definitely have experience with that. As far as like using it as from my perspective, my opinions on it, like as a user, I think that GA4, I'm going to say something very unhelpful, which is that there are some things that are better and some things that are worse, and there's some things that are just completely different. I think one of the main things that's worse, you'll probably notice right away, is the default suite of reports that GA4 has is really, really bad compared to Universal Analytics. It tracks a lot of data that's not necessarily helpful, and what it does track is not as intuitive to find as UA did. The real-time report is completely uncustomizable, much to my eternal disappointment. As someone who could spend a lot of time in UA configuring the real-time report to look exactly the way I wanted it to. The parts where it's better is that I think that while Explorers is not as user-friendly as custom reports in a lot of ways, like it's slow and kind of clunky, it has a lot of power. So you can make it very, very granular and to track things very specifically. And the way that you would sort of use custom reports in UA and do like custom drill downs, you can do that to a pretty similar, if not like deeper degree in Explorers. It's just that some of the interface stuff is kind of wonky, and it makes sense to kind of like Brad said at the end of his video, you kind of have to just dive in and fiddle with the interface yourself to make that work. I know it is a bit of a sea change as far as like the way that GA4 processes data and how it's not apples to oranges with UA. Now, the fact that like events were this kind of weird sideshow in UA unless you had a very specific kind of high power user setup, and now it's like the foundation upon which everything is built in GA4. So that definitely takes some getting used to. I think it's a little bit easier to, if you're using Google Tag Manager, to get the custom stuff set up. I really can't imagine trying to run GA4 without Tag Manager. As someone, I'm not a software engineer. I'm not a web developer. I don't code, but like you can figure out Tag Manager with like a lot easier than just kind of going straight into it. But yeah, I think that so GA4 is obviously a big shift. I think that initially, when it initially launched, it was in a much worse state. And I think that's kind of calcified its position in a lot of people's minds. It's like, oh, this is a straight downgrade from UA. And I think in some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. Because it's a Google product launch. It's never going to be easy or straightforward. But I think that I mean, I think the stuff that Brad's laid out here helps a lot in figuring it, kind of sifting through some of the noise and getting to the stuff that you're probably looking to like actually track. I really wish that they would come up with a way to export the data from UA and give some kind, allow for some kind of like apples and oranges, like historical data comparison, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So I don't know if Shay, I don't know if you wanted to take questions now, or if we wanted to pass the mic.
Yeah, we can, and I do think that historical data question is one that has come up a lot, and the problem is that you really can't. You're going to have to export it, and it's going to be in, I think, whatever format. I mean, I think Brad's been suggesting people to export to BigQuery if they can, and that's basically it. Like even at Metrics for News, like we have historical data for everybody, and we store that for folks. So, but we're trying to figure out still is if that historical data, even if we have it for you, how useful will it be entirely if some of the ways in which the calculations for some of these metrics in analytics are changing, like around bounce rate, like around active users. Like, so you'll be able to kind of compare things, but we still don't really know just for the API, because Google is still kind of working on making sure the API is stable enough to go forward. And they'll have it all ready by July, and they're sort of refocusing on that now, because they've heard some complaints about just call limits on the API, just wonkiness on the API, et cetera. So yeah, but I agree, like with Mike, I mean, I think, I actually think, as someone who's been in analytics and doing web analytics for since analytics has been around, that bounce rate change and being able to adjust it a little bit, I think is going to be helpful for people who really want to define what bounce rate means. Because I think if someone is coming for a single article and then leaves, having that be a bounce, it's not really set, because I think, as we all know, like analytics is not necessarily designed in the broad universe for news, right? It's not for newsrooms. Like we're adjusting to something that is meant for e-commerce, which is what GA4 is really hypersensitive to. So, and yes, that I do mean the measurement. Yeah, exactly. Not American Press Institute, so, which is the other API that I often talk about. But yeah, so, and that's a great question. What is the likelihood of a delay? I mean, it's Google. So, if there's enough pressure, they might delay, right? But they seem to be pretty hard, fast with the deadlines so far, with everything they've set with GA4. So fingers crossed. But I'm glad people are talking about reports. I'm glad Mike was able to sort of talk about reports. And that is something that I know that in talking with Nicole, the Google Insights team, since they work with a lot of newsrooms who are going through GNI or work with GNI, they're coming up with some reports that they think are going to be more useful to newsrooms, right? Because I feel like that's something that we're trying to figure out. So that's why I'm hoping to have her for an office hours to kind of go through some of the templates that she's recommending people set up.
I just wanted, because I saw a lot of people asking this in the chat.
Yeah.
I answered the chat when I wanted to highlight it. Like, I think, I'm looking forward to seeing like the sort of recommended templates for a lot of people to kind of replicate the sort of the greatest hits of UA. The one that you're probably most likely to look for is the replicating in UA what was under behavior, site content, all pages is now under reports, engagement, pages, and screens. That is the report that you are probably looking for the what content has the most page views or most sessions on it. That is probably the one you want to look for. So that is that was one of the first things I had to figure out too, because I of course wanted to see where is the thing that just shows what content is doing well.
Yeah. And Richard, that's great. And that's great. If that's a helpful resource, that's something that we can, and that's something I can definitely put to Google Insights too, because that is something that Nicole wanted to know, like what would be most useful for her to kind of come and present on. So these are all fantastic suggestions. So thank you. Yeah, Mike, was there anything else? I mean, I think that was really helpful. I think that is there anything else that's sort of been, because I think for a lot of folks, we were talking about this on the product strategy team this morning, like whenever we have these big product changes, there's definitely this mind shift that has to happen, right? And we're always trying to figure out like how do we adjust. So what's been easy or difficult in terms of just like an understanding how this is going to go? I mean, because I think for me, it's like when I first understood like one of the first, some of the first newsrooms, like all the UA data that was going to be sort of like almost like lost to the ether if you don't download it. And it's not like, I mean, that to me is like a panic moment, right? When I could feel it. Like I'm not even in a newsroom anymore, but I can still feel that. Like that's a lot of historical data that's just sort of not there and easily accessible. So what are you most focused on now to kind of
yeah, so I think that I also share the panic about the historical data problem. And I still haven't found a great solution yet. But I think that one of the things that has been one of the things that's been helpful in sort of managing that sort of sea change is that I think GA4 clarifies a little bit easier, like when you had to deal with like event scope and things like that, where we're thinking about how UA was looking at things. Some things happened on the user level, and some things happened on like the session level, and some things happened on the hit level. And now you would run into reports where if you're trying to measure certain kinds of things, you would be like, oh, this is incompatible in scope, so you can't actually measure this thing. That seems really intuitive to a human, but is really impossible for UA. And with GA4, just breaking it down into like, there are users and there are events and there is nothing else. And you never had to think, like you barely had to think about that as far as like event scope. That's actually been helpful in terms of like streamlining that process. So, but I think that I'm focused like, I mean, I think the battle with analytics is always going to be getting to the point where you can talk about these numbers with like your newsroom in a way that isn't just more page views up good, page views down bad. And I think that some of the explorations, the ability to kind of make custom reports in a different way is still going to help in that discussion. Like we don't like open up Google Analytics like our whole newsroom or anything like that for a reason. And I know that ties into some of the Data Studio, which people are asking a lot of questions about. I don't know what Google's plans are for Data Studio. I don't know if Google knows what Google's plans are for Data Studio. And the one thing that is definitely has been very frustrating with GA4 and Data Studio is that you will run into the request limit very quickly if you even have like a couple of moderately complex dashboards that are pulling in different things. That has been a source of frustration on my part, where it just means like, well, I'm trying to run this report, but I literally can't until the top of the hour when their call limit resets. But I don't have a great answer for that aside from just keep your dashboards as lean as you possibly can.
Yeah, and that's something that Brad talked about last week a little bit, and then and it's something he's actually working on. He was hoping to have it ready for today to share, but it's proving to be a little bit difficult. But he's trying to sort of figure out a way to configure a workaround through BigQuery that might help you sort of collect some data and then push it out. But that's proving a little more complex than he thought. So he's working on something that we hope will kind of help with some of that call limit issue in general. But for the long term in collecting these reports and collecting data. So anyway, Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate your help here and sharing your insights. Now I'm going to turn over to Barry and Aaron from the Waco family of papers. I'll let Barry explain how many there are. I know we have several who have metrics for newsrooms and partners with us, and I know Barry's been watching their GA4 get set up, and I know Barry, you and I have talked a little bit, and I think echoing sort of what Mike said. I mean, I think the reports have been kind of a beast and kind of a but what has it been like for your team, especially since you're also, because I think this came up last week too for at least one or two folks, having both information coming in or data coming in from not just websites but also apps, and because you have other products that are coming in now, because that's the other thing that with GA4, it doesn't distinguish, right? Everything gets pulled in, so you have to sort of figure out how you sort of look at that data. So what's been the process for you both from that front and then just more generally, like what's been the learning curve?
Sure. Our configuration is pretty complicated, and kudos to Aaron Lancaster, who's on here too, who's really done the engineering behind all of this. But just a pretty quick overview for everybody. So we have about 11 daily newspapers, and we've got a handful of weeklies. We have websites. We have web replica edition, basically PDF edition pages, and we have apps. for almost all of those properties. We also have a separate checkout process, a separate domain for checkout process. And we had separate GA properties on every one of those. And so what we've done is we've tried to integrate all those properties into one, each individual site, each newspaper property into one GA4. So we can really track users across the experiences they do, from subscriptions to checkout and so forth. We've also integrated variables that come from our CDP, our customer data platform, to really have a better understanding of those users and follow the workflow through it. Prior to GA4, we've been using Data Studio, which is now Looker Studio, dashboards for the properties to really kind of come up and we built these out for every property, and they can go and get a snapshot of how their traffic's doing. And we actually pulled those other that information for the apps and the web replica editions into that dashboard, but we couldn't track those users, across the different devices and platforms they were using. We've rebuilt those, and Aaron rebuilt those tediously. Thank you, Aaron. What pain! But we never really exposed the back end of Google Analytics to all of our newsrooms. It's pretty complicated. The old version was actually easy once you got used to it, but the new version is so complicated to try to go in and build things. We used to do a lot of knockout reports using what was called custom reports in the old platform. I think somebody asked about exploration, and which is the new custom report area, and it's tedious. I think one of the other question was, can you share reports? You can came up. There's an option to share reports in exploration, but it just shares it in that one property. The old version of Google Analytics, you could create a report and share it across multiple properties. I haven't found that ability yet in the new version. So it hampers someone like us who has, we want to have a similar report shared across multiple sites. You can't easily build that into each property. Anyway, that's in a nutshell. That's what we've done. We started, late last year working on this. Aaron, I can't remember what date you really jumped in, but it's been a continuing process. And I was just telling Shay before we got on, we're still finding things. Oh yeah, we forgot that. Oh yeah, what about that site? All of our sites have subdomains and other little properties incorporated in them, and you've just got to get everything covered. Make a list of all your properties and your domains, and make sure you don't miss anything. Is one of the biggest things that has come up for us. Aaron, jump in anytime.
Yeah, I mean, I think the what I like that's different now is just you don't have to deal with like event labels and categories and actions for all your custom events. You don't have to think of it that way. Now you just, whatever you want the event to be called, you just name it that. So I think in that way it's simpler. But yeah, kind of what Barry was talking about, how we have all of our different like apps and different sites all going to the same GA4 property for a single market. You do have to remember in your reports to filter. You have to figure out what's the best way to filter down to just like what I want to see. Maybe you can filter by stream or by host name and things like that. And I know I often forget to do that. And so the numbers come out looking larger than I expect.
So
one of the biggest. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So that was one question I had. So like, how are you able to kind of filter that out? Is that something you have to? Can you set that up as through custom, like a parameter through an event, or do you have to sort of do it on the front side?
I guess it might be possible to do through a parameter, but right now I'm just filtering by host name for the most part. If I want to look at just the main website versus subdomains or other websites, but then for the apps, I have to filter by stream ID.
Okay.
One of the biggest concerns I have, looking at data, and I think we've talked about it is, for instance, users. I mean, users are different. They're counted different. They just don't marry up exactly is what we're seeing when you come over from the other one. It could be due to missed tags, or it could be due to some other things. They're just the way they're being counted. So you gotta, when you're starting to look at old data from the old system and the new data and trying to compare apples to apples, it's going to be hard. I think all of us are going to we're essentially going to lose about a year because we're going to look back and say, how did this, how was July of last year? And you got to pause and go, well, it's not the same, so it's going to be hard for us to really kind of, determine, growth and change on some of these things. This is, you might have to have a different way of looking at your audiences, which is, I think, is what they're kind of forcing us to do anyway. And but building that change in historically is going to be a challenge. Store that data. I think you talked about storing data offline. We've been talking about it. We will likely just drop it all into BigQuery and just kind of have it available there, so it doesn't really interrupt. Hopefully, it doesn't interrupt any of our historic dashboards that we built out there. I would recommend you look heavily at the Looker Studio. It is a lot easier to build things in Looker Studio than it is to work, in my opinion. Mike, you may have a different opinion, but in Looker Studio than it is to build in Google Analytics. It is cumbersome.
So Aaron and Barry, so one question we have in here, there's two questions here I thought might be good. So when you're pulling in your app data, is that coming in through Firebase or Google Tag Manager? That was one question. And then the second question is also for the taxonomy. Like, are you basically using the same using the same sort of naming regimen from UA to GA4, or did you come up with something completely different in terms of tracking different, what used to be segments, et cetera?
Aaron, I'll let you take all that, the Firebase fiasco and everything.
Yeah, Firebase is what we're using for the apps. And as far as taxonomy, I don't know that the old way of doing it, some of the names that we had weren't perfect. So we actually took this opportunity to kind of clean it up and make it more clear, I guess. But for the most part, we're tracking all the same things that we were before. They're just, I think, simpler to understand. The name is more clear.
I would advise, Aaron works on data in almost the business analytics side. I work on the audience side, and we work together, but we probably should have worked closer together on some of that taxonomy and naming and things, because I was constantly going back to Aaron and go, I can't find this. Where is it? And it was like, oh, I renamed it to this kind of thing. So, you need to collaborate on those which was fine. And it makes a lot of sense why he did it, but it's like, some of that's not going to line up on older reports, and we just need to be aware of it when we, build the dashboards and when we train our markets on how to use the new dashboards. So Firebase was another issue. A lot of our Firebase configuration was we're with our app vendors, PressReader. So we had some standalone Firebase configurations. We had one configuration that had a bunch of properties in it. And so what we're doing is releasing new apps, basically rolling out individual Firebase properties for every one of the apps, where previously we had it blended together, which wasn't a big deal when we were using, basically the old UA reports. They were broken out and easy to find, but the Firebase was complicated.
Oh, a question here, a follow-up from Elizabeth. Are you able to run Firebase on UA and GA4 simultaneously? Or are you just doing it for GA4?
Aaron, you want to take that, or you want me to?
I believe we're doing both right now. Well, yeah, we haven't gotten it released on we haven't got GA4 released on all of our apps yet, but
yeah. We're pulling in on our new reports. We have a new standalone Firebase property that's being pulled into the new reports. We're still running the old UA, in our case, the combination Firebase report with the old UA properties. We'll run those, we'll keep those running as long as they'll let us. But it gives us a comparison too when we get these new apps rolled out, what's working. Some idea if at least the traffic numbers are close, correct? We also ran into issues too. We had I'll share this with you guys. We had our web replica edition vendor, Olive. We weren't able to control the GTM tags, and we had them add the new GTM tags we're going to use for GA4 properties onto those, and we ran into we ran into some double page view counting that occurred on our old UI. That's Mike. I see you shaking. Yeah, we ran. I mean, so I started getting calls about, wow, my web replica edition traffic was really good in November and December. Well, we accidentally double counted your pages. So it's just little things like that that can happen. And, gosh, you got to document that too, going back, because there's little things we've learned through the years of GA. We flag stuff in the GA analytics properties and like make notations of, because you'll see something happen and we'll make a notation. Oh, this happened. This was left off, or this event happened, or something occurred that we're able to figure out why the analytics are maybe skewed or different or higher or lower.
Great. Thank you, Barry and Aaron. That was great. I appreciate that. And thanks for all the questions. If we didn't get to them, we're going to get to them in April, and we'll follow up. I've collected them all. We'll follow up with folks individually if necessary, and feel free to reach out to me directly if you need to. But so we're going to wrap up today a little bit, and then just a couple of programming notes. So just a reminder, we are going to be sending out next week a link to this video plus the first week video plus the slide decks for both. Brad's full video, a whole bunch of resources for you. And hopefully by then some registration links for some of the early office hours where we can have some of these additional questions and dive in maybe a little more deeply on some of these sort of group questions around GA4 itself, because it's we're here to try to figure out how to get through this together. So, and I was telling Barry in the call ahead of the, I've also was talking to Claire yesterday and some others. Like, I feel like in July we should sort of have a regroup for these folks here, either for like a group happy hour or group therapy session, or it could be both. But so stay tuned for that. But I think it would be good to come back after to sort of see how things are going, because it's when these things happen, it's definitely it's a big deal, but there's a lot of us out here trying to figure it out together. So hopefully we'll get through this. But anyway, thanks for your time today. Thanks to Aaron, Barry, and Mike for sharing some of your insights on what you've seen so far. Thanks to Claire. Thanks to Brad for the videos. And thanks to all my friends and colleagues at API and the product strategy team to help us make this through. And also for Metrics for News folks, keep watch out for your inboxes. We are getting close to having some timeline for you for when we're going to be able to get folks' GA4 data merged in to Metrics for News. We're working on the back end to kind of figure out how this is all going to map in, because it's going to be different. So we're trying to make sure that we have a good step-by-step tutorial for all of you, because we want to make sure your dashboards and any kind of reconfigurations you have to make, your engagement scores, to any kind of audience types, et cetera, that they're all spelled out clearly. So stay tuned. We should have some news on that, hopefully as early as next week. So thanks for your patience, and hey, have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Shay. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks all. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.